All right, welcome back, everyone. Good to see you all on this rainy Tuesday, at least for most of us here in North Carolina. Hopefully power stays on for everybody here with us, and we'll get through today's session together. Our session today is on board governance, and we'll go to the next slide where we'll cover a couple of housekeeping items, and then we'll pass it over to our interpreters briefly to give us a couple more notes for today's session. Y'all are familiar with Zoom at this point, I would hope. All the mute lines have been muted, but certainly raise your hand or use that chat feature to share questions or comments. We do encourage the enablement of your video during our class today. And it says let's practice the annotate feature, but we'll do that a little later. So no pressure as you learn about that. Be sure that you do select your interpretation preference down in the bottom for English or Spanish. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Ava. Yes. Okay. Gracias.
I'm not hearing.
So we won't hear it in English. She's translating right now in Spanish, I believe. Okay. Thank you. And I just saw Dulce as our other interpreter. We're really grateful to Sensole to provide this interpretation. They've also translated many documents for us over the past few years. So we're delighted to have them and appreciate their help today. Oops, looks like we had someone practicing with the annotation there. That's okay. We'll go ahead and delete that annotation if we can before we move on. Thank you to the next slide. And I'll pass it off to you, Lisa, for our next slide to go over today's agenda.
I can't get it off mute.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. I thought I was on mute. Oh, wonderful. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. Like Rebecca stated, it's very rainy here. I got back yesterday from vacation in the sunny island of St. Kitts. If some of you, I don't know if anyone had heard of St. Kitts, but I had family there. My mother's from there. So coming back home to this rain was just really sad, and it was really hard getting on this call this morning, thinking about all that sun. But I thought about all your happy faces, and it helped. So to talk about the agenda for today, for some reason, did the screen move? Great. The sessions are fluid with breaks as we did for our first session. We'll fill out the group as we're going through. We're going to have short breaks. Board governance is pretty intense, so as much as you can keep focused and not multitask, I think it would be great for you not to miss any of the information. As usual, we'll send around the wraparound information at the end of the session. And please, and also when we try to make note about the format of the sessions, the reason why they're such in detail is to keep from giving homework assignments or pre-readings or things that you have to do leading up to the session. So we try to make them as interactive workshop as possible. And as you saw the format last week, we'll just continue to do so. Ask questions. We'll try to keep track of the chat questions as they come up. And one thing you'll need, as I'm looking at my notes to remind myself, to grab, and Dr. Palmer will also repeat this, you'll need paper, pencil, pen, or markers, whichever is your favorite tool to write with, handy or somewhere nearby that you can easily access. So as you can see, the agenda is pretty packed. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Palmer, not to waste any more time.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. We are in session 2, and so in just a minute, we will switch to gallery view, and I'll get to kind of see all of you. Right now, I can just see a few of you as I could scroll through, but I do want to just kind of remind us and highlight just a couple of points about our format and our design for the Institute. This Institute was developed in an applied format. So when we first developed it, we developed it in person, of course. And then we began to switch, and we switched it over to being able to do the series virtually. And we did that during COVID. And so our first virtual session was right in the midst of COVID. But in terms of the design, as you probably recall, last week, when we went into our breakout sessions, we did that by roles, and for just trying to work towards having you self-select which group you'd like to be in the breakout sessions. You are more than welcome to go into a breakout group that may not align specifically with your role. But we set it up that way so that individuals who are in similar roles and who might want to get to know each other or may want to learn from each other by way of roles. So we made that adjustment. And then in terms of the topics, just as a reminder, so the management topics that we are focusing on for
We lost you there, Dr. Palmer, if you can hear us.
did I freeze just a little bit?
You did.
Yes.
Okay. I'm
We
gonna
we
turn
heard you last said something about the management topics.
the management topics that we worked on last week were from our, or that we identified last week are 6 topics from our 12 principles and practices lineup. And so we kicked that off with looking at the level of capacity, talking about our framework. And today, we will go into, as Lisa mentioned, board governance. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that our approach to sharing and training on these topics are from a fundamental foundational perspective. And so we just want to make sure that we're clear about that. And then also, the team did mention that we do try to incorporate or have incorporated interactive features. So the series is not your traditional webinar, but it is as in person as we can make it, or we try to virtually. Another aspect of the format is that we try to minimize homework and pre-reading. We try to facilitate the learning in this space in real time. And so we do provide a wraparound resource as a follow-up. But we do try to minimize the homework and the pre-reading. Here's something that we are very, very much, we very much want to encourage you to do, which is to complete the evaluations. We always do a debrief after each session. And we review the evaluations. And in some cases, we make adjustments in real time and enhancements to our approach based on the feedback that we get. So please keep it coming because we do utilize that to enhance the Institute overall. And then lastly, typically when we complete a session, we leave time. Sometimes it's after the 12:30 time slot, but we do stay on so that we can answer individual questions for those of you who have questions that you may want to ask outside of the Zoom space with everyone else as a part of it. So just wanted to go over just kind of the overall format and
Weather must really be bad where she is.
Yeah, it's probably the weather.
Mm. Mm.
Dr. Palmer? I think you froze again.
Is she still on? Let's see.
She may, looks like she stepped out and will rejoin.
Yeah,
So let's go on to the next slide. I think she pretty much had wrapped up a little bit, and we answered some of those questions mainly because we got some feedback in the evaluations and wanted to just clear up a couple of things about our format here. There she is. I'll go ahead and admit her. I know how frustrating it is when you're having connectivity issues. And we'll move on to this next slide when she gets back on here. Does everybody remember seeing this from last week? Raise your hands if you remember this. Nice, good. It's ringing a bell. It's all coming back, right? I see some thumbs up. That's good.
is she back on? I don't see it. Oh, there she is.
yes, I'm here. Hey,
Hey,
sorry.
that's okay.
I don't know if anyone else is in Guilford County, but there yesterday when they started talking about the rain and the wind and all. I'm in Guilford County, I'm in Greensboro. And I know that there's some folks on the call that are here. So just kind of bear with us whenever there's a kind of a little tech problem there. I will get right back on as soon as I'm able. So
Maybe you should keep your camera off. Would that be helpful?
yeah, I will. But thank you, Sheila. Yeah, I'll certainly try, but I did do that a second ago and it jumped off anyway. So we'll just work with it as best we can. And what I may do when we go into a break, I may just kind of shut everything down, team, and then just kind of come back on, just refresh. So here is, I think where Rebecca was asking the question, do you remember this image from last week? Yes, this is our capacity building framework. And the capacity building framework includes our principles and practices. There are 12 management functions that we highlight or that align with our principles. There are 216 practices, and you had an opportunity last week to work with both the principles and the practices when you did the capacity assessment. There is one guide that we use, and there are 3 management conditions or states of a nonprofit organization that we have framed or kind of built into this assessment. And we did some work with that last week, as you recall. One thing I do want to point out here is that the exercise that you did last week was twofold in terms of looking at assessing capacity in alignment with the principles. We did a basic capacity assessment, and if you have your workbook, if you would just kind of grab it real quick. I'll give folks time to grab that. So if you look at page 10 of your workbook, this is where we explain what the way in which we frame the current condition or the current state of your nonprofit organization. Also remember that we gave you 2 book resources. One was titled Life Stages of a Nonprofit, and the other resource was a nonprofit management text. And so both of those resources are really good resources. I use those and refer to those quite often when I am just kind of trying to stay current and really kind of understanding some of the ways in which we frame how a nonprofit is managed and things to consider. So those are 2 really good resources. So on page 10, you have just kind of the way in which we frame build, thrive, and sustain. Page 11 through 14, page 11 through 14, this is what we consider to be our basic level of assessing capacity. So I'm still talking about the framework here. I'm leaning in on capacity assessment and just kind of lifting up the fact that we have a basic way of reviewing and understanding capacity. That's pages 11 through 13. And then we have what we call an advanced level of looking at capacity. And that is pages 16, I think, through about, is it 20? Might be a little further than that. Was that 29? And so here you have each principle. You have accompanying practices for each principle, and you also have build, thrive, and sustain in terms of the current condition of your understanding the current condition of your nonprofit organization. And what I will say here is that what I like about our assessment, build, thrive, and sustain frames are uniquely in alignment with that management function. So it's not this kind of cookie cutter way of looking at what build might look like and what thrive might look like or what sustain might look like in practice, but it's customized to the specific management functions. Calvin, I see your hand.
Yes, Dr. Palmer, thank you. So
Mhm.
referencing page 10 in the workbook under sustain, one of the things that's mentioned is stable revenue streams. Now, I understand what those words mean, but in the context of leading a nonprofit, in my case, I'm president of the Winston-Salem Black Chamber of Commerce. Can you give me a little bit more insight, mindful that we still have a lot to do, of course, of what should be my interpretation of stable revenue streams, especially as with most of us, if we're a nonprofit, we're relying on grants, we're relying on fundraisers, we're relying on sponsorships and board donations. So what does a stable revenue stream look like in practical terms?
So one of the goals that we highly encourage nonprofits to try to achieve is to diversify your revenue stream. And it is, to try to not have more than a third of the dollars that come in coming from one source. So that being the case, we know that it is, you have a lot more, I'll just say freedom when you have unrestricted dollars. You have a lot more freedom to utilize those dollars based on the need of the nonprofit and not just based on the promise that you made by way of a grant. And so when we talk about stability and sustainability and solvency, those are all terms that you'll hear when it comes to revenue streams. And so what we want to work towards is some consistency in where your revenue is coming from. And trying to pursue those opportunities that will yield some consistent dollars coming in. So for example, if you are writing grants, it might be it might be a good idea to more than 1 year of funding. You know, maybe it is that you have, you look for grants that are going to give you funding over some years. Also, when you think about diversification, you have to, let me not say have to, I would suggest that you take into consideration diversifying your revenue based on the type of nonprofit that you have, because not every approach is going to work for every organization. For example, membership may not be an option for a particular nonprofit based on the type of nonprofit it is and the premise for which that nonprofit was established. We can talk more about this when we get to financial management and fundraising, but those are just my general thoughts. I'm always mindful. If we could go to gallery view, that would be great. I can't see anybody, so I can't see hands and I can't see. I'm always very, very mindful that we have a very diverse taxonomy of nonprofit organizations. And so what works for one nonprofit may not necessarily work for another. And so while we are giving examples, I highly encourage that for you all to share, the different approaches that you take on all of these management functions. But keep in mind, it has a lot to do with the type of nonprofit that you have. So just kind of keep that in mind. There are some comments, team, in the.
Thank you.
There's some comments in the chat. I don't know if we want to lift up some of those.
Well,
Thank you for your question.
Anna had given some feedback in terms of our nonprofit. We have membership and admin fees, but I think you spoke to that.
Okay.
Calvin thanked her. Also, the Kingston Arts Council has a chart that shows where their funding comes from for all the patrons to see. I like how transparent they are. I'll be using this idea, utilizing. That's from Anna as well. And
Okay.
mhm. That's it.
Okay. All right.
Did we lose you again, Dr. Palmer?
Okay. I'm gonna cover this piece of information and then we're gonna take a quick break.
Okay,
And I'm gonna reboot here.
okay, that sounds good.
Just so that we don't have the interruption. But for now, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So in terms of just kind of thinking about capacity assessment and capacity building, team, if we could go back to slide 12.
I think we lost you again, Dr. Palmer. I think
You
we
may-
might have to take that break a little earlier than we thought.
I was going to say the same thing. You may want to take a break.
Yeah, I think so.
You got. It's 9:57.
Yeah, let's go ahead and plan to come back.
10:05.
And
5 minutes, 3 minutes.
yeah, about 5 minutes or so.
Give her time to reboot.
Oh, Greg's asking for 10. Greg, you're yeah. How about this? We'll compromise. We'll give you an 8-minute break. Does that sound good? 8 minutes. Okay, we'll settle on that. So 8 minutes from now, it's 9:57. So we'll come back. When would that be? At 10:05.
Yep.
We'll see you all back here soon. Thanks for hanging with us. Enjoy your brief break. And Dr.
Great.
And we left off on slide 12.
Perfect.
Definitions, and we can keep it moving. Hopefully.
Do we mention
All
too,
right,
if
so
we need to
team, if-
reselect their language or interpretation?
We didn't mention that. so
Okay,
I'm
good.
sorry. If you can reselect your language, because I think when we went off, we will make sure that the interpreters still have that on there. Are we good there? Are there any comments there about the interpretation? Just reselect your language. Okay. All right, Dr. Palmer, that shouldn't take too long.
All right, okay. So one of the things that we want to highlight here is just a few nuggets around what capacity is, how we utilize capacity assessment and the way we think about that, and then also in terms of building capacity. So that is that's kind of where we're gonna pick up, and then we're gonna go in and take a look at the results and findings of all of the organizations having completed the capacity assessment. And so when we think about capacity, one of the ways that we think about it, or that we work in the area of capacity, is taking into consideration the ability to manage growth and development. Of course, we're trying to focus on our mission and our vision, but we are looking at capacity from the perspective of what are we able to do? What degree of capacity do we have in place? And then we can take that a step further and we can assess our capacity. I mentioned last week that there are probably about a half a dozen capacity assessment tools. There are other, and most of the tools that are developed based on those. So you might see some other capacity assessment tools, but if you dig a little deeper, you'll see that there are about a half a dozen that continue to surface. One of those is the organizational capacity assessment tool. I did share that last week. This is a tool along with the assessment process that we learn in this institute. This is a tool that offers another way of looking at capacity in terms of 10 management functions. And so, but once you take a look at that, you'll see it aligns with the 12 principles. But that's another resource that I reference from time to time. And I did utilize that tool in some other research projects. Capacity building, here we're talking about implementing strategies and techniques that help us to grow and develop. And so those strategies and techniques will probably vary from organization to organization. Once we have completed the capacity assessment, we then take those results and we make some decisions about what is it that we want to work on. So what areas do we want to build capacity or do capacity building? And so we have the results and findings. Everyone completed the completed an assessment related to the 6 topics that we're covering in this institute. And so we want to share the results of that exercise. So keep in mind, the management functions or principles that we're focusing on in this institute are board governance, program design, management and evaluation, strategic planning, financial management, fundraising, and human resources. Those are our 6 areas of management or 6 management functions that we're focusing on. Team, do you want to just kind of share with folks what we have in the chat for them? Rebecca, I see that you've loaded up the actual tool there.
Sure, real briefly, we took individual results from all of you and compiled the top 3 or 4 of the most frequently selected practices within each principle that we cover in the Institute. And that helps us to design each session with that in mind. So if there are certain practices that a majority of this group has said they want to learn more about or incorporate in what they're doing and their organization, those will be highlighted in this document that you see there. It's kind of interesting because we have this assessment or this summary from each of the 9 cohorts that we've had. So we've got a long history of seeing which practice or principal practices are most selected by folks in our institute, which has been really interesting. And they tend to be the same ones from session to session. They might move around a little bit in that order, but the top 3 or 4 tend to be, for the most part, pretty consistent, which is really interesting. So if you're into data and that sort of thing, it can be really interesting, but this tool is really this one where we give a summary is really more for our own benefit. So we can really tailor each session to those practices that you all have most checked off as being ones you want to work on.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. And so if we look at board governance, one of the areas, when we had you do the assessment, we asked you to note the practices that you want to work on over the next year. So I'll repeat that. We asked you to indicate or to select those practices that you wanted to work on over the next year. And so for board governance, the number 1 practice that was highlighted is under sustain. And that particular practice is to ensure the board understands its overall responsibility for raising sufficient funds to meet the organization's budget. Team, you can move this up to sustain. So that was the number 1, collectively, that was the number 1 practice that was highlighted in terms of what we want to work on for the next year. Under program design, management, and evaluation, the number 1 practice was under build at 73% of those of us who completed the assessment. This particular area is to ask program participants and potential participants to share their ideas and perspectives. And what came in close second is under sustain, to secure funds using proven fund development strategies to sustain and fund our programs. And so those were kind of the top 2. Under strategic planning, the number 1 practice was under sustain. And that practice is to establish a schedule for periodic and annual review of the plan to assess goal achievement, accomplishments, and challenges. So that was the number 1 under sustain for strategic plan. For financial management, there were 2 that kind of had the same percentage. The first was under build, have a strategy for establishing financial reserves. That was at the top of the heap there. And then under sustain, to identify and implement new revenue generating strategies. And so those two kind of bubbled up to the top for financial management. As it relates to fundraising, the number one was under sustain to analyze donor giving patterns and trends to guide major giving strategies. And so that was that kind of bubbled up to the top to be number one. And then under human resources or related to human resources, the number one practice that folks said that they wanted to focus on over the next year was to provide staff and volunteers with clear current job descriptions and necessary tools to produce quality work. And so, as you can see, there's a lot that we could highlight and talk about once your organization has assessed its capacity. We did talk a little bit last week about the using this particular approach, having your staff complete the assessment, having board members complete the assessment, and then taking a look at that to see kind of what the emphasis might need to be if you're trying to prioritize ways to enhance the management, these particular areas, and actually try to achieve these practices or put these practices to work. So we can go back to gallery view now. Any thoughts, any initial thoughts or reactions to what it is that you saw there? And you can unmute or you can raise your hand and you can, any initial reaction to what our collective results were?
I just think, this is Georgiana with Greater Life of Fayetteville. I just think from the evaluation or the assessment, the majority of us are on the same page of where we want to be and where we want to go with our organizations. So I think this is fantastic information and that we can use and move from there.
All right, thank you for your comment.
Yeah, it helps you feel a little less alone because you're like, oh, people are struggling with similar things and they want to learn the same things that I maybe need to learn as well or want to incorporate. That's good.
Janita.
I was gonna echo exactly what they said, but also add that I have a board meeting tonight, and I'm going to mention that I want them, hopefully by the next quarterly board meeting, to participate in the assessment, because I think that would incite them to want to be more proactive. So I think this is going to be a very helpful tool.
Thank you. Thank you. And one of the things, and I did conduct some research years ago where I distributed an assessment, a capacity assessment to about 200 nonprofit organizations. Out of the 200, about 67 to 70 completed the assessment. And what I was trying to learn from them was, as a result of doing an assessment, what did it prompt them to do related to capacity building? So just having those results in front of them, what did it prompt them to do? And there was a kind of a diverse way of using those results. There were some nonprofits who said, well, it prompted us to do what you shared, Janita. It prompted us to share this with our board and to ask them to chime in. For some of them, they blatantly identified some areas that they wanted to work on, and they got to working on it right away. Now, when I shared the assessment, I did ask each nonprofit to have the executive director complete the assessment, because my sense at that time was that if they did complete it, they are in charge of what happens, right, in the nonprofit, and they could probably take whatever results they had and put it to action. And so I was able to explore that just a little bit by way of having those 67, 70 nonprofits give us that feedback.
Dr.
You
Palmer?
can, yes, uh-huh.
Quick question, because I like the way that what you and the team shared was framed, which was the information you shared was specific to our group, our cohort, but over the 8 preceding cohorts, similar information, if not identical information, was revealed. So what are your thoughts on why there's, for everybody, different specific programs, different locations in the state of North Carolina? Why is there this common theme of these recurring responses, as opposed to, we got a group in cohort 1 that said this, and then it was totally different in cohort 2? Why do you think there's the ongoing sort of recurring same things for everybody?
Because these are fundamentals. The saying, reading is fundamental. These are fundamentals. These are areas of managing a nonprofit organization that are consistent across nonprofit agencies. And because there's that because they're fundamental, it makes sense that it shows up. Like, we can see that there's this need for building capacity. Now, keep in mind, we asked you to assess capacity over 12 principles, right? Well, over 6 principles. But there are more, that we could have added more, which would change what those results are, obviously. But I'll couch it at, it's fundamental. These are just fundamental. The work that we do in nonprofit organizations related to these 6, might I say 12 principles, whether we plan it, whether we are being strategic about it, or not, we oftentimes find ourselves doing work in these areas. Any other reaction to what we're saying, Janita? Is that from before, or is that a new hand?
No, this is me
Okay.
again.
Okay.
I think one other common challenge across the nonprofit spectrum may be, the difficulty of even growing your board. And this is a negative perspective, what I'm about to say, but when you do these type of assessments, some board members may look at this as more work. So you may potentially be running off some of your board.
Mhm. Mhm.
Have you had any feedback from people that maybe what you intended to be a growth tool, that it actually deterred some board members away? Just interested in that.
Not
Perspective.
assessing capacity in isolation, no. Not just
Okay.
assessing capacity. I would have to say no.
Okay, good.
I've not seen this run board members off. We'll do a deep dive, because board governance is exactly what we're getting ready to go into.
Okay.
But there are a lot of reasons why board members might decide to leave, and we'll talk about some of that, but not just based on doing an assessment. No, I've
Good.
not seen that.
Okay.
So our topic for today is board governance. And so we're going to jump right into that work. One of the things that we did prior to today is we included a question on Facebook. And so, Rebecca, I'm going to let you pick it up from here.
Sure. Let me share my screen and pull up our Facebook responses here. Raise your hand if you were able to join. I know some of you may not be on Facebook, so I apologize if that's not going to be an option for you. We've also explored maybe starting up a LinkedIn page as well, for you all to join and connect that way. So we need to work on that. But you'll see when you come to the group page, this is what it looks like. We'll provide the link in the wraparound at the end of today's session. But the nice thing, the kind of interesting thing is that we've got folks in here from all of our cohorts, probably since, I don't know when we started the Facebook group page, but we've got folks from different cohorts. So two things I want to point out. We have a little welcome here for all of you. And then this was the first question that we posed about what practices have had the greatest impact when it comes to developing a more engaged and active board. And it looks like, I don't know that we had that many responses because it's new and folks haven't joined yet, but asking them to do something specific related to their strengths is something, a key practice that the group noted as being really helpful in getting them to be active. The other thing I want to mention really briefly about this Facebook page is that this tool can be used by you to, if let's say you want to poll the group and ask a question, you want to find out a referral for a consultant, or you're looking for, a book or a resource on a particular topic. This is a great tool, and I would love to see more folks using it in that way, because the tool is only as good as what you use. You use it and make use of it. So feel free to join. We'll put the link in the chat later today and in the wraparound. If you're able to join, it's a great tool that I hope you'll take advantage of. But we'll continue to have polls throughout the session that you all can respond to. That's probably the only work outside of the group that we ask you to do. And it's a really light lift. It's a great way for us to just get some feedback and incorporate some other elements into each session. So that's that.
Perfect. Thank you. So moving into a little bit more detail as it relates to board governance. So one of the things that is important when we think about engaging our board members, and when we think about fostering an active board of directors, it is important to really understand and have a sense of what type of board culture, and I'm probably speaking more to the executive directors in this moment. And I'm also probably speaking to individuals who are board chairs in this moment. And for those of you who are not either one of those, you can share this message with your executive director, and you can share this message with board chairs. A board of directors, the culture of a board of directors is fostered by way of who is leading our nonprofit. So who that CEO is, who that executive director is, their approach and style to how they manage, and also how they lead people has a lot to do with to what degree a board of directors might be as active as you want or as engaged as you want. I often get the question specifically from executive directors, how do I engage my board? My board members are not active. How do I foster that? And what I say to them is that a part of that, a part of shifting and getting your board to be more engaged, I know we're looking for this rocket science magic recipe to do it, but really it's about building a relationship with each board member. I'm speaking to executive directors in the moment. It is building a relationship with each of your board members and determining and trying to understand, why are they there? If I am on your board and you are an executive director and you don't know why I am a board member, then that question should be answered to begin to try to foster a relationship with me as your board member whereby I am more engaged. I'm going to pause there for reaction response. I don't see any. And again, here we are, here we go. It's fundamental. It's fundamental. You know, if I am the CEO and I have 20 board members and I don't know why those board members decided to be a part of my board, then I'm missing an opportunity. I'm missing an opportunity to utilize that to foster a relationship. Calvin, I see your hand, but I'm gonna come back to you. I do want you to go to page 31 in your workbook, and we have kind of laid out here a definition for a board of directors and a description or definition for a board member. And so I want to kind of talk us through these two ways of thinking about both. The board of directors is the collective group of individuals who govern and provide oversight to your nonprofit. That's the collective group. That's the team of people who work alongside the executive director or CEO and govern the nonprofit organization. And again, this is fundamental. This is fundamental. I know sometimes we want to jump right into what we want to tell the board members to do or how we want to tell them to be engaged. But from a foundational standpoint, it's important for us to understand that the reason why we have boards of directors of nonprofit organizations in general. So our board of directors, it's a governing body. It's a governing body for with nonprofit organizations. They are responsible for making sure that we're in compliance so that we maintain our 501c3 status. They are also an advisory group of individuals that provide governance and oversight in partnership with the executive director and the CEO. I'm going to repeat, in partnership. I oftentimes hear individuals say, well, the board of directors I hear executive directors say, the board of directors is my boss, BOSS, they're my boss. They are an accountability partner. You know, they do performance reviews of the executive director and the CEO, but the spirit of the relationship should be partnership and collaborate, with the executive director or the CEO being the resource, the primary resource of knowing what's going on in that nonprofit on a day-to-day basis. Partnership and collaboration. We should be working together.
Dr. Palmer?
Yes. Can I, Brandon, let you hold. Calvin had his hand up first. So Calvin, I'm gonna let you go. And I see Ann, I see your hand as well. And might I, team, here we go. This is always a hot topic. Board governance is always a hot topic. Calvin, you go, and then Brandon, you're next.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. I will be brief. So, when I articulated to our board, when I became president 3 years ago, I used a model that I typically share when I'm working with nonprofits, because the other hat I wear is a consultant helping to build the capacity of nonprofits. And what I share particularly to founders, but sometimes executive directors and board chairs, is what I call the Michael Jordan syndrome. And most people know who Michael Jordan, as opposed to Michael B. Jordan, Michael Jordan, the basketball player. And I say, you know, somebody comes to the table with the vision, right? Maybe I'm the founder and there's a need in the community. And so I have been called to help the community and bring my skills. And it's not about the money and all of that. So they're the Michael Jordans, right? And I say to folks, as I said to my team, Michael Jordan, with all of his individual skill and talent and passion and all of the success he had as an individual, could not win the championship by himself. So I love how you kept repeating partnership, Dr. Palmer, because what I share with folks is Michael Jordan didn't win because he was Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan won championships because he had Scottie Pippen and he had crazy Dennis
Mhm.
Rodman and he had Coach Phil
Mhm.
Jackson. And so my
Mhm.
point in mentioning all of that is whatever the founder or the board chair or the president in my case may bring with the passion, and he or she is the leader, and so I'm going to leave the decisions to them because they're the leader and they're Michael Jordan, so I can't be him or her. I
I'm gonna have to, Calvin,
reinforce.
I'm gonna have to cut you off there. But I get what you're saying. Thank you. Brandon?
Thank you. You said a really great term, and I want to make sure I got it right. You said the board is not our boss, but as executive directors, but accountability partners. Was that the term that you used, Dr. Palmer? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
It's very clear that I have a different approach to the board as a resource than my predecessor did. And interestingly enough, my predecessor is one of my best friends and mentors in the world. So it's been really interesting to get a different perspective of her through the board, and hopefully a more positive one, at least currently. So.
Awesome. Thank you. And what I will say to that, and I did start off by sharing this, the relationship between the executive director and the CEO and the board chair and the executive committee and the board of directors, that relationship really does help to foster the persona and or the culture of that board. So I'm gonna go to Ann. Ann?
Thank you, Dr. Parker. So I'm in very much agreement with everything you've said. And I'm the board chair of Johnson Service Corps in Durham, North Carolina, and I feel like part of my job is to be the executive director's #1 supporter. And that the executive director's success is the organization's success. But I also appreciate the part about accountability because we want that, right? Because we're our better self when we're held accountable. The thing I see missing, at least to me, it seems missing in that direction of board was any mention about mission, vision, and goals, because the boards I've been a part of get into trouble, but I did see the word policy. The boards I've been get in trouble when they move out of establishing mission and vision and goals, but then want to micromanage at the policy level. And there's a gray area. There's a gray area. So I was just wondering if you could say a word about why mission and where you believe mission and vision and policy priorities lands in this definition.
Governance, under governance, and we're going to go into detail about that in just a minute. Governance is where I see that. But again, in terms, and I don't think I missed anyone. Thank you all for sharing. So page 31, board of directors, board member. So there was a whole lot of energy around board of directors. And so let's focus on the individual board members. So I, as an individual board member, I am serving on a board. Some of you serve on a board. And the individual board members, I think Calvin illuminated this with his example. We are offering strategy. We are engaged in decision making, and we are offering strategies and engaged in decision making under the governing and overseeing responsibilities that we have. And so that's important to remember. So there's the board of directors, the collective group, the team that governs and provides oversight. And we as individual board members make up that team. If you go to page 32, there are, and this kind of has to some degree, kind of a legal component, legal, a legal component to it. We are also expected as a board collectively and as individual board members to demonstrate duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. We are expected to do that. When we decide that we're going to be a part of a board of directors, or when you're recruiting individuals to be on your board, we are also expecting that the individuals that are a part of the board are going to demonstrate duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. As it relates to duty of care, we're going to take care of our nonprofit. We're going to be good stewards. We're going to work to make sure that we're in compliance. We're going to make sure that we are stewarding the resources that we have that is purposed for achieving the mission and seeing the vision come to pass. Duty of loyalty, we are loyal to the purpose. We are loyal to the mission, and we are working to not compromise our the mission and the vision of the organization by way of our actions and behavior. And so when we sign up to be on a board, we are committing to being faithful to that nonprofit, avoiding conflict, and we are working we're being very intentional about not putting our personal gains above the mission and the vision of the nonprofit. And then with duty of obedience, it's about policies, it's about procedures, it's about being compliant, it's about, making sure that we are taking care of the opportunity to be a public charity. So duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. And oftentimes when a nonprofit is taken to task from a legal perspective, there is a review of if we have stepped out of line of being in a way of caring for the nonprofit we represent, being loyal to that nonprofit, and then also in terms of being obedient to those policies and procedures that we have established for the nonprofit that we work with. So the board of directors, the board members, and then again, this is fundamental. And you hear me, I'm saying this a lot today because sometimes a board of directors or board members, depending upon what they have, what they're working on or what they're presented with, sometimes they lose sight of that and forget that this is in fact the way in which they are to work. And so it's important for us to remind them, those of us who are providing leadership to said nonprofit organization. So as a team,
So, Dr. Palmer, real quick, I think we all know the answer. You can put answers pretty quickly. How do I convince my board that they're not responsible for day-to-day operations, micromanaging to a large degree?
It takes time, especially if it's embedded in the culture and you inherited that. It takes time. What you may want to do is, begin to be pretty straightforward about, am I talking to an executive director? I want to make sure. Am I talking to a board chair? That's important in terms of what I say. Is this person a board chair or executive director?
I'm the artistic director. It's like the executive director, kind of.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. One of the things you may want to do is you may want to have a conversation. Just really have it on your agenda. Talk to your chair so that you and your chair are on the same page. Give your perspective to your chair, and then see kind of how they respond to it, and see if you have an ally in your chair, and let your chair help you communicate your desired change, because they are the liaison, the chair is the liaison between the board and you and the organization as a whole. So I'll just stop right there because I don't want to use all the time for that, but that is a
And-
place to start.
And if the person is the chair,
If the person is the chair, here's where we have to be adults, right? I mean,
that'd be
it's
great.
not gonna change. You know, it's not gonna change. If we can't, you can't, as the person is the ED, if you can't have a conversation related to bringing about a change for the good of the organization, that's an interpersonal aspect of your reality. I'm speaking more mechanical in terms of kind of how we should operate and function from a management standpoint. And we'd have to talk offline about exactly how you might do that with that person, because I don't know enough about them and where you are, how long the organization's been there, how long they've been the chair, what is that? There's so many different pieces that I would have to hear to give you some very, very specific guidance. But in general, I think sometimes it's about, let's show up as adults and let's try to do what's best for the organization.
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to talk with you at another time if you'd like.
Yes, I would. Thank you.
Are we good? I think we paused there for a minute.
Yeah, I think you're good. Someone, Danielle had to jump off for school, but no other question.
Okay. All right, team, if we could go to slide 17, boy, this is getting really good. If we could go to slide 17, and I'm going to turn my video off just to give it a little bit of a break here over the. So here's a thought. Board of directors, is it more of a science?
I lost you again, Dr. Palmer.
Yeah, she was on a roll.
Yeah, I know. Might be time for another break. I think we're coming up on another one. It may be well timed. I can carry on with this slide since she and I talked about it when we were planning. This is actually a new slide, but we wanted to drive home this point to all of you that this institute, at least for board governance, we talk more about the science side of board governance, which is the management, if you think of the management of a nonprofit. So you'll see that over here, the science side, logic, analysis, and communication. Whereas we know that the art or the leadership of boards and board governance is how you engage them and help encourage that sort of active culture within your board. And those types of skills that you're employing as an executive director, as a board chair, sort of in harmony, is the intuition, creativity, and emotion. So when we're thinking about all those pieces coming together, full brain mode, right? We wanted to drive home the point that what the Institute is really is driving home is more of the management or science side of things. And the art is really up to you all to take on from there. Dr. Palmer's calling me right now. Let's see what's happening. I think she was trying to get back in. Here she is. Hey, Dr. Palmer, can you hear us?
This is not going to be a challenging next hour and a half. I'm not going to have it. It's not going to have it. This is too important. Like, this is just not gonna happen. It is a little breezy and windy over here, so,
Yeah.
just as a FYI.
Yeah.
So where we were was, is this whole notion of sharing and trying to understand, how a board of directors functions, or how we might engage them more, or how we might foster an active board. Is it more of a science, or is it more of an art? And so here is our perspective, as it relates to our work today. From our perspective, the science of managing a board is based on the mechanics. So it's the mechanical aspects of managing the board, which starts with the bylaws. The bylaws explain how the board of directors is supposed to function. So there's the science piece of it. The art is about establishing and understanding the board from the perspective of the people that are a part of that board. And so the science, management, mechanical bylaws, the art, leadership, interpersonal relationship building.
Mhm.
And might I add, when you think about management and leadership, it's also about being invitational to board members, inviting them to assist with something specific. And one way we do that is we have committees. That's one way that we do that, is that we have committees. But this idea of managing the board of directors. So from foundational, fundamental, the science, our bylaws. When the nonprofit was established, there were a set of bylaws that were written, and those bylaws explains how the board is supposed to function. And then we have the task of actually putting people in place and providing leadership and guidance to those individuals so that they find their place with our work as it relates to the nonprofit that we represent. If we could go to gallery, I don't know if you all want to take a snapshot of that before we do that, but so here we are with what a board of directors is, what board members, how board members fit into that team, thinking about duty of loyalty, duty of care, duty of obedience, managing the board, and leading the board. Managing the board in terms of the science of it all, and leading the board in terms of the relationship. Now, there are cases where the nonprofit organization doesn't have an executive director, or they don't have a CEO. The nonprofit is a volunteer-led organization. We do have those types of structures. And in those cases, a board of directors is more involved in the day-to-day operations because they don't have a staff person in place. And so that takes on a different way of how we work with the board of directors. Let's see, any initial reaction there before we go into our next piece of work? Just going to be a little bit of hands-on. Any initial reaction here?
Dr. Palmer.
Okay. Yes.
I like your presentation, and I think you're right. I've been in my position a little over a year, and there's a great deal of there's a science to managing and working with that board and even leading them to a certain extent. But there also is that art component of trying to build relationships. I had the benefit of having some work relationship with some of my board members prior to me becoming part of the organization. But part of the challenge for me now is leading the organization in a different direction because factors on the ground have caused us to have to change focus and approach. And to your point, that requires even more board input and insight because now you're leading these organizations to a different place than what they might have been before, and having to get the board support, or not so much their support, but their insight and their assistance in navigating that change.
Thank you for that feedback. Here's another point I want to make about the remainder of our time and what we're working on today. Our work emphasizes the science side of what we've presented. So we're focusing more on the mechanics in terms of managing our board, right? And in terms of facilitating the work of the board, facilitating the work, coordinating the work. We're doing both of those now. And we're also sharing this and informing you as it relates to this with the idea that there is an executive director in place, or there's a CEO in place that is, tasked with leading and managing the nonprofit organization. So I saw a comment in the chat team. It popped up and then it went away. So I don't know if it was a question or not.
Georgiana was asking, how often should they update their bylaws?
It's probably a good idea to review your bylaws annually. It doesn't mean you're going to update them. You may not have anything to change, but we all know real life happens, and sometimes you're faced with a situation, and you might have to update your bylaws in real time. So you're faced with a scenario, and you may have to make some changes to it. But just from a best practice standpoint, it's a good idea to review those bylaws and to make edits to the bylaws. I would say annually. Another way to look at it too is our strategic plans these days are about 3 years. You might incorporate it into that process as well. But taking a look at your bylaws annually is a really good practice. If you're the board chair, you look at the bylaws a lot. I mean, you're in those bylaws quite a bit because you're presiding over the work of the board. Again, so in facilitating and coordinating the work of the board of directors, we're going to focus on, and then we're going to take a break. We're going to focus on the structure of a nonprofit organization and where does the board of directors fit into that structure. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the structure of the board of directors of a nonprofit organization, and where does the board of directors fit in that structure. And so team, if we could go to, and can I get everyone to take out a piece of paper if you didn't do it earlier when Lisa asked you to? Just grab a piece of paper or something to write with, so that when this slide pops up, I'm going to give you an instruction. And once we finish this work, we will take a break. So if you would, on your paper, could you draw this image for me on the piece of paper that you have? Could you draw this image?
One more slide.
Yeah, we're here. This is the slide. Can you draw this image for me? And if you could just give me a reaction once you've drawn this. I don't want to go too quickly. Just kind of give a reaction. Let me know that you've drawn it. All right, I see some thumbs up. Okay, I think we're there. I think folks have done that. So the next step in this exercise, you see the 5 bullet points over to the left side of the screen. The first bullet point is titled Board of Directors. The next is Executive Director, volunteers, staff, and 4 board committees. If you would, in your drawing, place these 5 positions or roles in the org chart, in the structure. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that. So where in this structure should the board of directors go? Where in this structure should the executive director go? Where in this chart should volunteers go? Where in this chart org chart should staff go? And where in this chart should the 4 board committees go? Okay. Give you time to fill that in. Great, great, great. Thank you for the reactions, letting me know that you filled that in. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And again, the focus of this particular session is around the mechanics of managing a board. The mechanics of managing the board. And that is demonstrated through facilitating and coordinating the work of the board. So how do we facilitate and coordinate the work? And so one of the things we're doing here is we are looking at, from an org chart perspective, where does the board of directors fit? Where does the board of directors fit in this structure? Okay. All right. Team, can we go back to gallery view for a moment? So you we have our org chart, and we asked you to put into place these 5 stakeholders, right? These 5 stakeholders. And so the first question I have is, where did you put the executive director? Where did you put the executive director? And
At the second large square.
and Georgiana?
I'm sorry, I apologize. I put it at the second large. You have the first big triangle, then you have the line come down to the one in the middle. That's why I put the executive director.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
Okay. When you're looking at the chart from the top, the top one, I have the board of directors, then the line comes all the way down to the second triangle. That's why I put the executive director.
Okay. Thank you. And team, I see in the chat a couple people have put where they put the executive director.
Yeah, some say middle box,
Okay.
second large square. I'm looking at the squares as I'm reading. At the top. third-
Uh-huh. Great. Okay. And real quickly, where did you all put the board of directors?
Mhm. Got the top, 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 top,
Okay.
second large box, top, first level.
Okay.
Top is getting the most votes.
Okay, great, great,
And I'm
great,
assuming
great, great.
first box.
So,
I'm
okay,
assuming people saying top. There's
got it. Got it. So team, can we show the filled in chart? We're gonna share the filled in chart here in just a moment. All right. You might have to make it a tad bit smaller. Yeah. So here is the chart filled in terms of thinking about, the org, an org chart for a nonprofit. Now, of course, this can be modified and changed, based on, other positions and titles that are in your organization. Um, the board of directors is established at the time that the nonprofit becomes a 501c3. It is a part of the application process that we have to provide a list of the board members. So the board of directors is established at the onset. The officers of the board are also identified at that time. And typically the officers, your board chair or president, your vice chair, your secretary, your treasurer, make up the executive committee. Makes up the executive committee. And then, of course, you have other committees, which is what it could be 10 committees. Well, you probably don't want 10, but you could have 10. You can have committees. And so that's what those four boxes represent under the board. And then we have the executive director. We have the executive director. Times when there's a transition in the executive director position or the CEO position, it is the board of directors that provides leadership and guidance as to how to acquire an executive director or a CEO. And then, of course, we have the staff that reports to the executive director. And then we have volunteers that work with staff, but also there are volunteers that sometimes work with the executive director. So again, here is a way in which we can visualize where the board of director kind of fits in the overall structure of a nonprofit organization. And again, here we are with the we're working with the understanding that it is a partnership. It is a partnership in which the executive director is working with every board member and the board member as a whole, in addition to committees. The one thing that I would say that you don't blatantly see in this image is the executive committee. So I would put that in your notes. that the executive committee comes out of the board of directors. And this is where, board chair or the board president, also provides leadership. Okay. All right, team, if we could go back to gallery view, that would be great. Any initial reaction to what we have shared here?
I
Okay.
think folks may be ready for a break.
I'm thinking that's exactly
A
what it
stretch
is.
break, bio break,
Yes,
more
yes,
coffee.
yes. Absolutely, absolutely. So the time is 11:10. We'll come back at 11:20, so we'll give a 10-minute break. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And team, if we could go to slide 19, that would be great. Welcome back from your break. Hope everybody is doing good. We're moving right along, covering all that we plan to cover, and so that's good. Thank you for a little bit of patience today as well. Janita, can I go through this slide before I respond to your hand up, or can you put your comment in the chat? Can you do that? And then
Yes,
I'll
ma'am. No
come
worries,
back
no
to
worries.
it.
Okay,
Okay, perfect. I'll come back to it. Just
okay.
just share that with us.
Right.
So welcome back from your break. All right, we're into the I guess we could call it the last leg or hour of our time together for today. Here's where we want to highlight board governance, board versus board oversight. And Anna, thank you for lifting up the question about where does the attention from the board, where does it come into play, the mission and the vision of the nonprofit or of a nonprofit organization. And so here is our perspective on this as it relates to governance. Our focus and attention is on the board of directors helping to protect the nonprofit organization. And that takes place by being a good steward or a steward of the mission and the vision of the nonprofit, as a board, partnering with our executive director to do our work as it relates to the nonprofit that the board represents. Governance also shows up by board members sharing their skills and their knowledge. I think I stopped at sharing skills, knowledge, and expertise. Thank you. And as it relates to governance, and then also ensuring that we are in compliance with our legal requirements as a nonprofit, and maintaining a 501c3, maintaining our 501c3 status in terms of oversight. So from our perspective, here is where the board of directors helps the nonprofit to be successful and to accomplish its goals and to be able to do the work in the community that the nonprofit is serving. And so oversight showing up in the form of success looks like ensuring that the work happens, evaluating the performance of the executive director with in the spirit of partnership and looking after the interests I'm pausing as I can see, it looks like, there's a little bit of freezing going on. I think I'm at provide resources to do the work, of the nonprofit. Thank you, team. I can see you nodding your head. Yes, thank you. So providing resources for the nonprofit to do its work, and then the expectation that there will be accountability and transparency. We could add to this list. You can add to this list, as it relates to your individual nonprofit organization. So board governance and board oversight, is the kind of the high level, umbrella, areas of the work that we do as a board of directors. Is there a comment in the chat? Janita, did you put your comment in the chat? No?
I did not, but it's okay. I'm fine.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Uh, so we can go ahead to the next slide, team. So we talked about
Hey, Dr. Palmer, you keep freezing. Is it possible for
Okay.
you to call in and use your phone as your sound?
absolutely, absolutely. Can you
Okay.
just give me that number real quick?
Sure, let me get that.
Good idea. Thank you.
Let's try that.
Okay.
Mm. Let me see if this will have a number.
Okay.
Leslie, do you know how we get the number? I'm looking for it under participants.
Yeah, I'll send it to you, Dr. Palmer.
Thank you so much.
Leslie.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And so I'll continue, and once I get that, I'll go ahead and sign in. So just give me 1 second.
The weather clearly is not on our side today. I really hoped that it would have
No,
been
it's,
moved out yesterday,
yeah,
but it's still with us.
yeah.
Oh, there it is in the chat, Dr. Palmer. And I'm keeping an eye on the participants to see when you call in and let you on in. Hopefully this will be better. Thanks for bearing with us, everyone. Chalk this up to an act of God, out of our control.
I have to have the meeting ID.
Leslie just popped that in the chat for you, Dr. Palmer. Sorry about that.
To Zoom, enter your meeting ID followed by pound. Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just press pound to continue. You are in the meeting now. There are more than 60 participants in the meeting. This meeting is being recorded. You have been added to the waiting room. You are muted.
All right, I just admitted you, Dr. Palmer, through your phone.
*6. You are unmuted.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yep, sounds good. Fingers crossed.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you all for that station break. Thank you, Leslie. So if we could go to slide 20. So as we move into our the next part of our work, it is focused on the duties and expectations, and we just want to lift up a couple of more kind of points about that. We talked about duties of loyalty, duties of care, and duty of obedience. Those are all preset expectations for any board of directors, no matter what type of board it is or what type of focus or mission it is. And so in thinking about our duties and responsibilities, we are focusing on the duties and expectations of the board of directors, the duties of a board member, and then the board meetings and attendance. When we think about specifically the responsibilities of the board and the way in which a board of directors functions, that is noted and explained in the bylaws. And so, team, if we could show the sample bylaws. When you look in your bylaws, there are different sections of the bylaws. And in the bylaws, there are what we call articles. And in each section of the bylaws, there is an explanation of the different aspects of how the board of directors is supposed to function. For example, there is a section in the bylaws that gives the reader an understanding of what the purpose of that nonprofit is and what the mission is and or what the vision is of that nonprofit organization. There's also a section in the bylaws that gives a description of what the officer positions are. So the board chair or president, the secretary, the treasurer, there is a description of those specific officer roles in the bylaws. Also, typically in the bylaws, there's an explanation of the committees and how each committee functions, typically in the bylaws. There is also oftentimes a description of how the executive committee works, and how it's supposed to function in the bylaws. And something else that I've started to see written in bylaws are the role of the executive director or the CEO. In some cases, there's a description of that in the bylaws. In addition there is a section in the bylaws that explains how the board of directors is supposed to vote. That is in the bylaws. There is a section in the bylaws that also gives an indication of what happens if a seat becomes vacant on the board of directors in the bylaws. So that's also indicated there. Team, I see a question in the chat. Do we want to capture that?
Yeah, it's a long one. Have a quick question. I was looking for a template for a board statement of, I'm sorry. Okay, I was looking for a template for a board statement of understanding policy. And in the policy, it stated, I'm legally responsible along with other board members for this organization. I'm responsible to know and oversee the implementation of policies and programs. When I presented it to the board, they wanted to know more about their legal responsibilities and their potential liabilities in the event of a lawsuit. Does anyone have any insight into what it means for a board member to be legally responsible for a nonprofit? Good question.
And so that is a weighted question. Let me just say that first. And I'll be more than happy, I don't know who posed the question, to give a more detailed answer in our office hour. But what I will say in general, it is expected that a nonprofit organization will have a board of directors liability insurance coverage. So let me start off by saying that. And there are instances where a board of directors, because it is responsible for the governance and the oversight of what happens in that nonprofit organization. So if the nonprofit is taken to task and there is a question or a misstep of being in alignment with duty of loyalty, duty of care, and duty of obedience, legally, a board of directors can be taken to task on a matter, and I'll just leave it at that. If your board of directors is asking for more of an explanation of what that means, I do think it's important to give them that explanation. Not necessarily the explanation I gave, but it is important for you to explain what that looks like. But a nonprofit organization is expected to have liability insurance as it relates to the board of directors. And when we're taken to task legally, it typically means we've stepped outside of taking care of the nonprofit, the loyalty piece, and the obedience piece. Those three duties come out of a legal situation. That's where those came from. Those emerged as a result of a legal case. Does that help? Does that help? Does that help?
Follow up with you after, but it does help.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
would just make one other point just to clarify one of the points that the doctor made. You need to really make sure that you invest and ensure that you get a directors and officers policy to cover your organization and your board. Correct. and your board members and yourself as the ED, because if there are legal action taken, that they'll be potentially at risk without having that directors and officers insurance policy personally.
Thank you. So again, it is important to review your bylaws and to understand what's in your bylaws. I would definitely start there just to make sure. In your workbook on page 33, we do have a list of board responsibilities. And so As you look at this list, is there any one thing that you see listed here that you are not clear about or that you have a question about? So I'm going to give us a couple of minutes to review the board member responsibilities list, board of directors responsibilities list. Is there anything listed there that you have questions about? Let me ask this question. Team, I'm just curious. Can you all give me an indication? I'm talking to the cohort now. How many of you have access to the bylaws? Like you've actually seen the bylaws and you know what's in the bylaws. I'm just kind of trying to get a quick poll. So there's like 55, 60 individuals in this cohort. I'm just trying to get a sense of how many of us know where the bylaws are or have seen the bylaws to the organization that we represent. And you do know that's public information. It's public information, it's public record. You can go to the North Carolina Secretary of State's office and you can see the documents affiliated with the nonprofit that you represent. You can also, I do believe the Internal Revenue on their site, it has been upgraded over the years, and you can also go specifically to your nonprofit and you can see what information is uploaded for your nonprofit as well. I think we're good with the checklist. And so here's what you can do for your own nonprofit. You can generate your own list of board responsibilities that is unique to your nonprofit organization. And I think that's, that's just important to mention in terms of thinking about that. Again, we're talking about board governance and we're talking about oversight. We're talking about how the board of directors functions and where we can find that information and where it should be. We're talking about making sure that the bylaws are current as it relates to your nonprofit organization as well. In your bylaws, there are going to be term limits mentioned in terms of how long an individual is supposed to serve on a board. And there's going to be information about the conflict of interest. There should be a conflict of interest policy or a note in those bylaws as well. And typically, board of directors, members of a board are not compensated. Typically, they are not compensated. So that's important to keep in mind. When it comes to legal compliance, we at the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, we have a legal compliance checklist that is real handy dandy that one can reference in terms of getting a better understanding what legal compliance might look like, and some examples of that. And so we'll point those out as we go along as well. But there are some specific legal compliance matters that we need to be mindful of as it relates to our board of directors. Another aspect of the work that a nonprofit does, look in your workbook on page 34. Page 35 we've already covered, but I do want to point out on page 34 that a part of our governance responsibilities, is the financial solvency of the nonprofit organization. While we may have staff that specifically focus on fundraising and financial management, it is expected that we will, as a board of directors, provide governance and oversight to those management functions. And in some cases, a board of directors will have a finance committee, and they may actually even have a fundraising committee. So that's important to keep in mind. Boards of directors also vote on a budget every year, so that's important as well. We have a work session. One of the sessions in the series is a focus on financial management and fundraising. So we'll do a deep dive into both of those. But on page 34, I do think it's an important part of our work serving on a board that we understand the fundraising approach to the nonprofit that we represent. And then also as an executive director or as staff, that we also understand the fundraising approach that we take with our board. Some nonprofits expect board members to give a donation, some don't. Some expect nonprofits to participate in fundraising activities and events. And so it's very different from one nonprofit to the next. But we do want to make sure that we understand that that is a part of our responsibility. Team, do I need to pause? I see quite a bit of the chat is popping like popcorn. So
Yeah, we have a couple of people who would like to know the term definition or clarity. One is on preserving institutional differences, and the other, can you explain Court of Appeal?
can I need more context.
So
I
I
don't
guess
know what we.
they're not
Uh-huh.
sure what this responsibility means, preserving institutional differences. I believe it's from.
Oh, the list. I got it now. I got it. Let me get back over to the list. I had moved away from the list. I'm sorry. Okay. Let's see. Now, which ones did you say?
Preserving institutional differences and serving as a court of appeal.
So there are instances where with the Court of Appeals, you could see this happen with a staff member, or you could see this happen on with a participant in a program. So there are cases where you might have a staff member who has had an experience, and it involves a personnel or human resource matter, and they actually may not be in agreement with whatever the decision was. And so the board of directors might serve as an appeal, a group of people who might hear that appeal from a staff member. Also, the same holds true when it comes to programming. There are cases sometimes where you might have a participant in a program who has a grievance. Just like a staff member might have a grievance, you might have a participant who might have a grievance. And a lot of times a nonprofit has a human resource committee or a personnel committee, and or they may have a program committee. And those committees might very well serve as the entities in which those folks will express an appeal of a decision that was made. For example, your nonprofit might serve homeless individuals, and maybe a person who participated in the shelter, for example, they might have a grievance, and it needs to kind of be shared going up the chain of command, and so the board might serve as that. When it comes to preserving institutional differences, this aligns with thinking about like what the mission is or what the vision is. And sometimes when a nonprofit starts, it starts with a belief and values as it relates to a particular cause or social issue or community issue. And it may be that they make a shift from that. And so they may decide that, you know, they want to preserve that history, or they want to not lay down that part of how that nonprofit came into existence. Sometimes that happens when committees are established. A committee might be established in real time to address a particular matter. Time passes on, and that is no longer an issue anymore, but yet they want to hold on to that history. Does that help?
As they're responding, one last question. Is there a legal rule for chair terms, or can organizations establish their own?
Say that again?
Is there a legal rule for chair terms? Or can each
Oh.
organization establish their own?
You can establish your own.
Okay.
You can establish your own.
That's it.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I know I saw a lot of stuff flashing in the chat, and I didn't want to miss it. All right. Let's see. I want to go to, I think I stopped on, was it financial management and fundraising? I think that's where we stopped. Another area I want to point out is that, and team, can we go to slide 24? We are responsible for funding human resources. We are responsible for funding human resources. And what that looks like is, in recent years, there has been a focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so a lot of the thinking and establishing DEI statements or DEI values has come out of board work and boards contributing to that. And so that's an area you want to think about. Also, recruiting and retaining board members, that's another kind of funding and resourcing the human resources of a nonprofit. And then employee recruitment and retention. Also professional development of the staff and board development and capacity building. And oftentimes these particular areas, as it relates to the human capacity of the organization, oftentimes with these items, there is a need for funding. You know, there is a need to support these areas as it relates to funding. What I will say about capacity building is that we have seen probably in the last 2 or 3 years where foundations are actively involved in funding capacity building. And so we're seeing that. But as a board of directors, these are some areas that we want to focus on. In your workbook on page 9, we have a principles and practices resource there for you. It comes out of our guide related to DEI. So I do want to point that out. There. So that's important to remember. Accountability and evaluation. Team, I want to go on to the next slide here. As a board of directors, again, we were talking about the art and science of facilitating and coordinating the work of a board. A part of the science, again, this is the management part. There is a opportunity for the board of directors to be a part of helping the nonprofit to have training and to also pay attention to performance, and not just the executive director and the staff, but training and performance of the board. You know, because as a board of directors, it's just as important for us to receive training as it is for the staff and the executive director to receive training as well. So we want to keep that in mind. In your workbook, if you would turn with me to page 36. In your workbook, go with me to page 36. And I am moving over there as well. We do have, as a resource for you, we do have a description of, kind of a narrative, some bullet points that can be crafted into a narrative in terms of the job description of a board member, the job description of like a co-chair or vice chair of the board, committee chairs, the secretary, and the treasurer. And so this is just a resource that we have here for you that you can use to help formulate your own. But also, I'm going to go back to this, your bylaws also should have a description, at least to jumpstart you on what these particular roles will have. If you look at page 37, the board chair versus the executive director, I've actually been infusing what this relationship should be throughout the morning, and that is that the board of directors and the executive director should be working in partnership. We should be working together. The executive director or CEO is left to manage the operations, the day-to-day operations, and the board of directors can offer some guidance, can offer some leadership, can be a resource, but we should be working in partnership together as it relates to that. On page 38, we specifically have a list of ways in which the board chair role is described, and I want to pause here on page 38 and give you an opportunity to review this list and to pose the question if there is anything listed here that you have a question about. And we're going to go into breakouts here in a minute because we want you to engage in a hands-on task. Any questions related to the board chair job description on page 38? I don't see anything showing up. I can see that one item is with other board members. It's probably not a best practice for the chair to be the only person evaluating the executive director. Okay. All right. Let's see. In terms of what we have here on the slide for you, we do encourage the evaluation of the board of directors as well. The board of directors should go through its own, just kind of check in how we're doing. Is there anything we want to change? Is there any aspects of who we are that we want to enhance? And we're going to do a hands-on task here in a minute related to that. On page 39, board chair versus executive director. Board chair versus executive director. This is probably one of my favorite handouts that we have because it's a quick reference and it helps us to begin to distinguish the role of the board chair versus the role of the executive director. And it's really important for the executive director and the board chair to collaborate and to be on the same page. And so what we have here for you is a way to distinguish those roles so that it is, at least to some degree, it clarifies what this looks like in terms of how the board chair is to function and how the executive director is to function. And so we give you some specific examples of that, some specific examples listed here. But again, from the very beginning of our work today, we have been infusing the message really that yes, those are two distinct roles, but those two individuals should be working in partnership with each other. So that's important. We just have as a another reference for you in your workbook on page 40. If you want to look at really kind of how your board is interfacing with the executive director, here's some questions you might want to pose, and that there be some clarity and understanding around the executive director and how they work in tandem with the board of directors. And so important to keep these things in mind. Okay, team, if we could go back to the gallery view, I do want us to take some time to work with a tool that we have provided for you. And like I said, you know, much of what we have talked about today in terms of what we have provided in the session is related to the managing of the board of directors. And what are we managing? We're managing the facilitation and coordination of the work of the board. It is very common when we when we present this workshop, it is very common that we have lots of questions about individual scenarios and situations that each of your nonprofits have, because every organization is different. What I will say to you when you are trying to shore up the engagement and activity of your board, keep in mind it involves people, and people bring behaviors and philosophies and ideologies and approaches that are different as it relates to your board as a team and as a collective. And so as the ED and or as the chair, you do find yourself working through those interpersonal dynamics in order for you to get the work done. And so we know that that this is the case. It's the case. This is cohort number 10, and so we recognize that, and we will stay on a little bit later once our session is over to maybe respond to some of those things that are unique to your organization. So what we want to do now is we want you to evaluate your board of directors. Are we excited about that? We want you to evaluate your board of directors. Yay! That's what we want to do. Now, some of you may not work as close to the board as others, but do your best. You know, do your best to evaluate them. So on page 41. On page 41. Am I on the right page? Page 41? Yes? Yes? Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure. I was just seeing if y'all were awake. That's all. All right. Page 41. You have 10 items that we want you to rate on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 equals needs improvement, 5 equals excellent. That's section 1 of the evaluation. Section 2, we want you to identify priority areas for improvement, and you'll do that by checking some boxes here. So we're asking you to note the following areas that you think the board should improve in the coming year. And then section 3 are a little bit more open-ended. And so here we want you to answer these questions in terms of what's the most important, what 2 things do you think we should change, and then lastly, we want you to note what are you most proud about of your board? What are you most proud about as it relates to your board? So, team, I'm going to let us stay here in the gallery. We're going to give folks a few minutes to evaluate your board of directors. And so I'm going to just pause here. I'm going to go silent and let you work on that. And then I want us to engage in a discussion about it. Right now, it is 12:05. And so at 12:10, if not before, you just give me an idea of when you've kind of worked through these, we will have a discussion about it. And I am here if you have questions. Team, when we go into discussion, I want to start with Shelley's question. Okay, if it's okay, well, I can see people are leaning over like they're writing, so I don't want to, I don't want to disturb or interrupt your concentration on completing the evaluation. One of the things that I will say, I want to start with Shelley's question. Shelley put a question in the chat about the usefulness of this particular evaluation in evaluating her board. And I'll say again, any of the resources that we use can be modified, it can be adapted, it can be edited, and there is probably out in the literature other examples. So let me just begin by saying that.
Real quick, can I stop everyone? I too am hearing the Spanish translation over the English, although I have English selected as my interpretation.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's okay.
Thanks.
I think maybe we can continue. I'm sorry. You may have to repeat what you were saying, Dr. Palmer, because we were hearing the Spanish.
Okay. What I was sharing is that Shelley posed a question as the usefulness of this particular evaluation in evaluating her board. And my response to that is that the way in which we select materials that we use is we select it based on best practices, and we determine what resource we're going to use in alignment with the principles that we share and that we promote as it relates to our principles and practices guide. That said, any of these tools can be modified, they can be edited, you can change them. You can create an evaluation that aligns directly with your organization. And also, there are probably, oh my gosh, so many different board evaluation tools out there that you can use. And I do think that we do have in our Info Central, with the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, we do have resources that are available to you if there's one that you'd like to use as opposed to this one. That said, the takeaway here is to take the time to have your board do a self-evaluation and to take the time to have your board have some discussion about that evaluation, especially those of us who want our boards to be more active and more engaged. Because when we pause to do a temperature check or we pause to do a check-in, quite often that will prompt a little bit more activity or a little bit more engagement, because now we know, quote unquote, what our grade is. And the question when we finish with the evaluation is, what is it that we want to change? Or what is it that we can change in the short term? Or what is it that we can change long term? So once we've gone through the process and we have the results and findings from it, from the evaluation, we can then begin to think about, well, what do we want to do? What do we want to do about it now that we know what our now that we know what the results are? Shelley, does that help? And for number 7, let me talk about number 7, because she did raise that question or share that related to number 7. When we're talking about the impact, we're talking about the impact on the community that you serve, or we're talking about the impact of the population that your nonprofits, programs, and services serve. So ultimately what we're saying here is that if your nonprofit focuses on making sure that every 3rd grader is promoted to 4th grade, then how is the work that your organization doing impacting that population? That's what that means. And so quite often we will have a mission and a vision of our nonprofit, and we're doing great work. but we may not be doing great work in alignment with what we say our focus is, or we may not be doing great work and having a significant impact on the population that we say that we serve. And so that's where that particular item, that's the place and the kind of the mindset around that particular item. I want to go to, for discussion, I want us to talk about two of the open-ended items that are and I'm on page 42. And I want to look at number 2, because I want to talk about the board, not the nonprofit, but the board, right? So I want to go to number 2, and I want to go to number 4. Number 2, if there were 2 things you would change about your board of directors, what would it be? And you can put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and the team will identify you and you can share with us. What would be the 2 things you would change about the board? What would they be?
Dr. Palmer, do you want me to read them out as they're popping up, or you?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Wow.
And then we'll get some voices here in a minute.
Acknowledge experience, follow through, increase our diversity. Board, one thing they would change is making our board a working board, involvement, ownership, more fundraising, activity in connecting their personal spheres with the organization. Assistance with business development, engagement, diversity, fundraising, empower board members as friend fundraisers, strong working committees, clear goals and expectations with timelines. That's a good one. Fundraising, define goals and ways to track them.
Sounds good. And I think I saw a couple of hands go up. So, but I don't see the. You can go ahead. Is it Lara? Lara? Go ahead. Yeah.
It's Laura. Mine is
Laura.
that I'd like my board to be willing to view us as a thriving business. And that's a little bit complicated, but we are really thriving as a nonprofit. And sometimes I come up against the kind of old school mentality that nonprofits should always be struggling. So they have a little bit of a hard time acknowledging that we're doing well and being comfortable with doing well. And so I would really like to shift that. I'm working on how to shift that.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else that wants to put a voice to your what you would like to change about your nonprofit? Okay. Well, here's my favorite one, number 4. What are you the most proud about your board, not your nonprofit, the board of directors? What makes you the most proud of your board of directors? And you can put it in the chat, or you can unmute and we will hear your voice on this.
Diversity, drive to support, devotion, love for the organization, loyalty to the mission, engage volunteers, mentorship, trying to keep up. Those committed to their roles, willing to help out, support, encourage our employees, disability and POC led, passion, I'm assuming that's people of color. The knowledge of the communities they serve, the joy, support of the CEO. I think that's
clapping. I'm clapping. This is good stuff. This is good stuff. Our board members volunteer their time. They give of their resources, their influence, They make connections for us. They give donations. They do quite a bit for our organization. And every time that I'm out in my local community, and I have an opportunity to praise board members and nonprofit organizations, I do it. Because while we might have our challenges and while we might want to improve and enhance what we do, we are doing some significant work in communities. And in some of our communities, if it wasn't for these organizations, people would not be served. There would be needs that would go unmet, that would leave our communities in some not so favorable situations. And so nonprofit organizations fill the gap. And we are expected to have a board of directors, whether they're as active or not, or as engaged or not as we would like for them to be. Our nonprofit organizations are expected to have a board of directors in place. And every day we can do a little something different to get a little closer to where we want to be. And it's not just one person's responsibility. It is collective, and it is working together to be able to do that. As I mentioned before, I think a significant takeaway is to be abreast of what's in your bylaws. Your bylaws are the launch pad, the springboard for the work that a board of directors is expected to do. That's where it starts. And then you can start to build, out from there. It's important to think about it from that perspective. The last thing I want to do before I turn this over to the team is I want to pose the question. Right now, you're thinking what, or right now you're feeling what as it relates to your board of directors? Give me an idea of where we are. Right now, you're thinking what, or right now I'm feeling? I see appreciation and motivation in the chat. Right now I'm thinking, or right now I'm feeling.
Thankful.
All right, perfect timing. Positive out. Lisa, I'm gonna turn it back over to you. I just saw this.
Grateful, cautious optimism, actually. Those are two interesting words together. Interesting. Appreciative for our organization's board. Feeling excited. Grateful.
All right. Thank you all so much for your time and patience today. I really appreciate it. Thank you, team, for problem solving today. You're great at that, and thank you for that today. As we go into our close, I hope that you all have a good remainder of the week. Looking forward to seeing you next week as we work through all of the different sessions for the Institute. And I think we can go to slide 29 as we go into our close, and we will stay on for a few more minutes for those of you who want to stay on and you have some specific questions for our office hour concept.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you again, Dr. Palmer. We appreciate it. And we again thank you for the patience with the technology. Just as a reminder, as I have done for the first session, telling you what our upcoming sessions will be. Next one will be program design, management, and evaluation. And then you can see how we go on from there, each one building on the other. So it's important for you to please make sure you attend. As usual, we have an evaluation at the end. Your feedback is very important. We've been reading them and trying to make adjustments as we go, if we can. If not, this one will definitely improve on future cohorts. The link should be in the chat pretty soon, if it's not there already. Please, as a reminder, we have our Facebook group. Please, if you have any questions, comments, please go in. I think we'll put in a question of the week. Make sure you're answering them so people can see them and answer them. That's a good place to go for resources. And like we did for this session, for next session, we also need you to bring paper and colored pencils also for the next session as well. So I think you'll have some more arts and crafts activities to do. So with that, just also want to remind you, now next slide, with each session, we try to provide you, we will provide you with some additional resources pertaining to the topic of the day. Today was board governance. So as you can see here, along with member benefits, another plug for being a member, you'll have access to, and these are just some, this is just a handful we pulled, but you can have access to so much more, many more resources in reference to this particular topic or any other 6 to 12 principles that we have at the nonprofit at the center. So again, if you're interested in becoming a member, the links are there for you, or they will be put into the chat again if you don't remember from the first session. And we also try to update you on upcoming events. We have our conference coming up. For those of you who are interested in coming, please, there's the registration information here for you to do so. We would love to see you in person. And then last but not least, our masterclass. And this will be our first masterclass we're doing. And again, I encourage those of you who can make it, because again, remember, this is fundamental. It's a broad, big conversation we're having on each of our topics, but we hope to take it down some more into the details for our masterclass pertaining to our principles and practices. So those of you who are interested, come eat with us, come share with us, and have a good time. And I think with that, that's it. And I finished that 4 minutes before lunchtime for 12:30. So we thank you. And if those of you are going to stick around for a few minutes, please do so. But we ask you to keep your comments short because there were a lot of people on last time. We want to make sure we hit up everyone with their questions, okay? See you in a few if you stick around. Bye, everyone.